All right, for those who are just joining us, this is the Maui Tomorrow Citizens Engagement webinar, and we are moving on to our 3 o'clock session. This is a session, a pretty short session, I would think, on how to write testimony. So we're talking about the basics, things that you need to put in your testimony to make it clear what you're talking about for someone who doesn't know, and what you can put in there to try and make an impact and influence the decision to go your way. So in front of your screen there is the sample written testimony from the State Legislative Reference Bureau. So I'm going to be adapting this to the county as necessary. But so it should say something like and you want to address the chair. So if the chair of a committee is Tina Wildberger, for example, you would say to Tina Wildberger, chair, and then the name of the committee that she's on. And as I said previously, you can get lots of examples on the capital.hawaii.gov website. You can look at other people's testimony. Some examples are better than others. And say that you're testifying about a particular bill or resolution, or in the case of the county communication or an ordinance. When you look on the agenda, it'll have a number. Typically when it's at the committee level, like the Government Ethics and Transparency Committee, it might say something like, the number would be GE212 or something like that. So that's very important so that they know what you're testifying about. The day and the date of the hearing, I've never put on the time and the place of the hearing. I'm not sure why that's necessary. It's suggested. Oh, it says optional hearing date, time, and room number. Yeah, so I guess the things in white are optional, but I think the day and the date is very important myself. Most important of all, who you are and whether you support or oppose or support with amendments. That's what they need to know. And then you need to talk about who you are. Typically when I'm testifying, I put my logo at the top because we're an organization, Maui Tomorrow. I don't beat around the bush. My style is to just say that Maui Tomorrow is in support of this measure or opposed to it, and then I tell them the reasons why. So that gets down to content, the reasons for taking your position. You can include your facts, experiences, and beliefs. It should be concise. Keep it short if possible. Just remember that the legislators have very little time. As Tina Wildberger mentioned, they pack an incredible amount of work into a 60-day session. So your testimony is competing with everybody else who's trying to get their way on the bill. And I find that it's helpful to put pictures in. I remember when I was testifying about a seawall bill last session, I put in a photo of a monk seal that was on the highway over by Oluwalu. And because it was in the testimony, I didn't know that this was going to happen, but that photo got picked up by Civil Beat and the Star Advertiser, and it started kind of a movement. And then I feel like the Department of Transportation responded to that, and then we got a visit from the head of the DOT to come over here. So I find pictures are very compelling. And like they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. But as far as your statements, they should be concise. And of course, everything you say has to be accurate. And then in your closing, you need to ask for what you want. So you summarize and restate your position. If you have any, this is something I don't see on here. If you have any suggestions as far as alternative language for the bill or the ordinance, put it in there and put it in the format that the bill comes in. It's called Ramsayer format, and so anything new is underlined and anything deleted is in square brackets. So that's how you can get to these people and speak their language. And then you sign it with your name and make sure you put your contact information on there. So I want to open it up to our other panelists who are on the line. Do you have any comments about what I just said?
Albert, this is Thorne Abbott, if I can speak. I think your suggestion to provide a solution, recommended language, is very powerful, and I think the legislature does appreciate that because it lets them hear what you're thinking on their bill. Kind of having a peer reviewer, an editor, take a look over your shoulder to say something in a different way. So I've found occasions where my edits actually did end up in a bill. So I think that's a great suggestion.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else?
This is Lucienne. I'm on the line. I'm certainly no expert on legislative testimony, but I've helped through my connection with Sierra Club submit joint comments where we suggested, modified language. And Thorne is right. If you possibly can suggest what it should say, that is a lifeline for people who are trying to find the balance between all the different forces that are pulling on them.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
The other thing is, what Tina said, short is really good. Brief and effective. And that's sometimes hard to do, but it carries the most weight.
Yeah.
I want to make a comment about testifying at the legislature. If you do not submit a testimony ahead of time, I think then you fall to the very bottom of the pile, whereas before you could sign up for it, they tend to call off all the people who submitted testimony and say, do you want to add to your comments? And so if you didn't put in that testimony and we run out of time, you may not get to testify at all. So just to say, it's really important to do the written testimony before you go there so that you will be, they'll not only say what you, if you supported or not supported, but also they'll tell you if you want to add to your comments. And those people seem to go first. And then they look in the audience and say, is there anybody else who might like to say something?
Claire's right, having sat through many sessions. First, they call all the representatives of agencies like OHA or the Department of Agriculture or, DLNR, anyone else who might have submitted comments, and ask them if they want to add to their comments or just stand on them. And then they start calling people who submitted written testimony to see if they're in the room.
Yep. A lot of people just stand up and say, I stand on my testimony.
Right.
Then I always look under their feet to see if it's under their feet. So can you now see the testimony that I submitted, the Maui Tomorrow testimony?
Yes.
Okay, so this is an example of what we submitted in 2019 on the House Bill 1326. And you can see clearly that we have our logo at the top. They know who we are. Testimony before the House Committee on Finance. That's who we're testifying before. The date, the bill, the title relating to water rights, and just very plainly that we have strong opposition with comments and proposed amendments. And then there's my name. So this is a format that I've seen, groups like Alexander and Baldwin, they do this, or the Chamber of Commerce, and I pretty much just adapted mine, emulated theirs, because I think they probably have a lot more experience. And it seems to work pretty well. So then you start off and you have to address the chair. So it's Sylvia Luke. Aloha, Chair Luke. Excuse me. Vice Chair. You always call out the chair and the vice chair and members of the committee. That's the formality that I think that they appreciate. So again, we're repeating that we oppose this. We have comments and proposed amendments, and then we tell them why. So citing the state constitution, citing the DLNR report from 2018, talk about some of the details of it, and then talk about defense of the public trust requires that we create some urgency, or else there'll be no incentive for these applicants to actually obtain leases. And then a powerful statement: in its current form, this bill does just the opposite. It's extending the status quo, etc. So we're telling them why we don't like the current bill, and then we propose some amendments. And this is just like, during this stage, this is what we figured out was probably the best idea, based on what we thought would pass or maybe not pass. And as I recall, I don't think we had a lot of success with this particular committee, but this was an idea, and the solution is underlined: 1 more year, and then if they can show good progress, etc. And then backing up that reasoning, these are public trust resources. In addition, we're proposing these kinds of additions to the legislature and things that we've been asking for from the Board of Land and Natural Resources for years, none of which have been included by any of the permits that testifying before the Board of Land and Natural Resources for. And then summarizing, we support, this is a convincing statement. It's a summary of the whole testimony. We urge you to amend this bill as shown in the following attached pages. And then we have proposed amendments. So this is what I'm talking about. This is the Hawaii Revised Statutes. This is section 1, section 1 of the bill. And this is as it's written. So this HRS section of the Hawaii Revised Statutes is amended by amending section C to read as follows. So I'm asking that they delete the word which and add the word that. I'm asking that instead of 3 consecutive 1-year holdovers, they say 4. And everything I'm underlining is added. I'm proposing that they add it. And some of these they underlined. So then it gets a little tricky. But this is the form of the bill that I would like to be adopted. At least I'm recommending to them. And so this is me trying to speak their language, because this is the language that they speak at the legislature. And that is a sample testimony that I think, if they hadn't already had their minds made up, then it might have had some impact. Any questions about that or comments?
You said it.
No,
I think you said it all.
Okay. Ooh, might be a short session.
Are we going to talk about county council testimony as well?
Well, this is just an example. I used a state legislative testimony one, but I think the principles are the same. Do you want to talk about any differences?
Well, the very first thing I think you need to think about with testimony, whether it's written or oral, is who has authority in the body that you're addressing. What do they have the authority to do? So you may not like a law that's proposed, but you may be asking legislators, say on the state level, to do something that only the federal government can regulate. So you look silly because they can just dismiss your testimony. The same thing with the county council. You may be asking the county council to do something that only the state has purview over, but really you could be asking the county council to do something that they absolutely could do. And that's what you need to figure out. Like, how can you ask whoever you're testifying to do something that is within their power to do?
That is so critical, Lucienne. If you ask, for example, if you ask the state to do something that only the federal government has the power to do, you should have known better if you're participating in this process. And so from the perspective of the legislators, I believe that you're undermining your credibility.
Now, that being said, I'm going to say that there are places where what is probably the deepest law and what is our customary treatment of the law are two different things. And that has a lot to do with traditional Hawaiian rights and kingdom law, some of which is, most of which is still really on the books, but our lawmakers are not familiar with it. So the people who come and bring kingdom law in and explain it and ask that decisions reflect it are actually moving the needle. They're actually, maybe they'll be kind of pushed aside at first, but eventually they will be listened to, and they're moving the needle so that we bring justice into the forefront. And I would use an example of maybe the push for civil rights. People were told, like, well, look, there's poll taxes. You didn't pay your poll tax, so you can't vote. Well, that was wrong. So they had to push back on it and say, no, there shouldn't be poll taxes. There shouldn't be these literacy tests. There's nothing that should make that the bar that you have to pass to vote. And so they pushed back, and eventually those things changed. So we need to push back, especially in the area of recognizing allodial titles and invested land rights that go with Mahele era claims. We just need to develop a body of court cases and get legislators who are willing to kind of think out of the box a little bit. And also, of course, do your homework and get the facts. But there are people that have some really good information on these topics. And even though they are usually told, oh, we don't have this in our jurisdiction, this is the land court or so forth, they should still get that testimony on the books, in my humble opinion.
I agree. I think that different people play a different role in the process. And that's not always the role that we play as Maui Tomorrow. But I can tell you that if someone is pushing the envelope, it moves the center more towards favoring the Aina.
Thank you, Lucienne, for that. I think that as someone who's testified to things that are on the books in law, and had zero effect after testifying, I have to say that that's very encouraging, and that we just keep going and keep using whatever we have there, but it is something that changes perhaps in time. So
Yes, Claire, progress is not always in a straight line, and things don't change until they do.
yes.
Nick Drance is bringing back the importance of voting. Testimony counts, but the most important thing is who we elect, who's sitting in those chairs. If the decisions are based on, well, he says subjective criteria, it doesn't matter. The way I would put it is if their decisions have already been made, or if they're listening to other people other than you, then you've got the wrong person in that chair. So recently, now Maui Tomorrow doesn't endorse candidates, but in the last election, the council got much better than it had been. And so we've had some people in important positions as chair, and we've been able to make some progress, I believe. So we always have to tie it back to who is sitting in the chair making the decision.
Commend this council for more openness and respect to testifiers. So it does make a great difference in getting the nerve to come up there and say something, is to know that you will not be, I would say, tried to be shamed into when you get up there, shamed by what you say. So I really commend the present council, and I really appreciate people like Mike Molina who will bring an issue forward, even if it's not his issue.
Well, thank you.
I wanted to bring up a question from Sarah. But Sarah was asking, can we review the jurisdictions, what they cover state versus county versus federal, just in general?
What the jurisdictions can cover. Well, now we're talking about the United States system of government. So just saying that in Hawaii opens a can of worms, but that's what I'm going to talk about because we make our changes within the existing system until that changes. So I'll just leave it at that. I would say that the federal government provides for, obviously national level things. To the extent that the federal government makes a law about something, such as aviation, the Federal Aviation Administration, they have control over. We learned this in the helicopter war days when we were trying to get them from flying and snooping in everybody's house, flying through Haleakala. We actually got the state to pass a law restricting where the helicopters could fly. The helicopter operators immediately took it to federal court, and they won immediately because operation of aircraft, that is preempted by the federal government through their creation of the Federal Aviation Administration. Same thing goes, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but the county passed a GMO moratorium. And when it was taken to court, it was determined that the county couldn't do that because it was preempted by the state. So the county has to operate within whatever bounds the state creates for it. And the state has to operate. It's a little different at the federal level because we're supposed to be United States with states' rights and federal oversight. That's been a battle that's going on for over 200 years, but kind of out of the scope of this. What the jurisdiction can cover, maybe the question is more aimed at what do they cover? You want to clarify that, Sarah? Let's enable Sarah to speak. Oh, she just said yes, what do they cover?
Mute.
So I think I'll talk about this from a land use perspective. And it gets complicated. It does get complicated. The state land use commission determines what can happen on different types of land. So there's conservation land, which is the most restrictive, agricultural land, which is supposed to be for farming and a few other things. Rural land is in between agriculture and the last category, which is urban. So in the state land use district of urban, the counties have jurisdiction, and that's where they can create zoning and create their own land use laws. If you go outside of the urban area, they can still have zoning, but they definitely have to comply with some of the state laws. They're sort of sideboards to what's going on in the ag district. And then if they try to do anything in the conservation zone, it's pretty much restricted. You agree with that, Lucienne?
The counties have jurisdiction of land, over land that is urban or rural state land designation. If it's ag or conservation, it has to go through the state system first, and then it can, it can come to the county, or it can be a parallel process. But the county can't just decide that a lot of ag land should be made into rural, for instance.
My understanding is that the county only has jurisdiction in the urban area, not in the rural. So,
in fact, there was a famous decision back in either the late 1960s or 1970s where Maui County and other counties just started doing community plans, and they just designated large amounts of agricultural lands as either rural or urban. And so it was challenged in court, and they had to kind of walk it back. And that left a lot of lands with this interim designation.
Oh, is that where that came from?
Yeah, that's where that came from. Yeah, there's a you could just do a whole discussion on that. There are people that are very knowledgeable about that. But anyway, the agricultural lands. The trick with the agricultural lands, though, is if agricultural lands is 15 acres or less, the county can act in the place of the State Land Use Commission and decide to make it urban or rural. Now, the county does have the right to process agricultural subdivisions, quote unquote, that are part of a agricultural subdivision ordinance under our state, under our county codes. And so we have a sliding scale that allows hundreds of acres to be divided into, so many lots of so many sizes. So the county can make ag lands into ag homesteads, but it can't make ag lands just on its own over 15 acres into, an urban designation or a rural designation.
So I really like that example because, if you compare our agricultural law to the agricultural zoning law on Oahu, we have a 2-acre minimum and we have a sliding scale. So 270 acres might turn into 23 lots or something.
Yeah, that's about right.
On Oahu, they don't have that. So 273 acres could turn into 273 lots.
Right.
Because the state minimum lot size for agriculture is 1 acre. Now that's a huge difference. So, but my point is that in this case, Maui County can be more restrictive.
Yes, they can, and there was a very long and thoughtful effort put into that, and it's far from a perfect system, but it was discussed at length in the late 1990s at the county council, and Saul Ku'uhalahala was, I believe, the chair of the planning committee at that time, and he just kind of made it his mission that while he was on the council to revise the ag ordinance so that it wasn't just, chopping everything up into 2-acre lots, which was the minimum in Maui.
Right.
I see Nikhil Ananda is on. Maybe we have him live for a question.
Yeah.
I'll get to Nick next. So I just want to make sure that we are answering Sarah's question, because her question was, what's the jurisdiction of the federal, state, and county? Are we getting close?
Feels like a very complicated question.
Well, that
Requires graphic.
Yeah.
But maybe Nikhil Ananda has a perspective. He seems, yeah. Who else in the room might have some input?
Okay, go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the 10th Amendment to the federal Constitution, what is not reserved for the federal government and not allowed to the state governments is granted to the state. Now that's so broad, and it brings up lots of Supreme Court cases, but generally, so I think Lucienne sort of hit it. It's similar here. What is not granted to the counties and not reserved solely to the state, actually, I would phrase it, stays with the state, and the county can always challenge it. And you've already given a couple of great examples of where those end up in court.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for that. All right. Sara Sekulow, did you have any, well, let me stick with Nick for a second. Your hand was up forever. We called on you 3 or 4 times and you've finally shown up. Did you have any other questions for today?
Yeah, sorry about that. Restlessness, and then someone came and visited me, so I was up and down. I wanted to thank Lucienne because I heard the last part of my comment about the SMAs. And I think somebody made a comment about elections, and obviously some of us have attempted that. The whole thing drops down to, I appreciate all the suggestions about about testimony. It really makes a difference of who sits in those seats. And of course, the state and the county is slightly different, the power of the chairs. But you were really right, Albert. It's so different now because of who sits on the county council right now. And we can only hope that come November, we make one or two changes. But voting and philosophically, I understand that some people, just that I've had it when I've talked to people, they refuse to vote either because they don't vote in the American occupying government, or they just don't see that it makes a difference. So that's the power of people that sit on the council, and you see the great legislation that's come through the last couple of years because the people that are sitting there.
Oh, we have a question from Nick Drance.
Aloha. I think it's important to mention that who it is that we elect as mayor and council members has such a huge impact that these issues that we've been discussing, that they relate to the system as it is and as it has been. However, what I want to say is that given the current circumstances that we find ourselves in, the paradigm is now changed. And while it's absolutely critical that we understand and recognize how government works and all these things, I don't mean to diminish what we're talking about, but there is a paradigm shift in progress right now. And so, as I say, my point is that who we elect has everything to do with dealing with the things that we don't agree with.
I'm a little unclear on what that last part means, Nick. Dealing with the things that we don't agree with.
Well, you know, the future of Maui depends on who we elect in the next election. We're pretty much talking about the old system, how it's been, and much of that will remain. And again, I affirm everything that you're doing here is critically important. However, to recognize the future as it probably will become, which is very different than the world that we live in now, it is important. We have our structures that are everything that you're talking about. However, the next election will determine directly how these policies are resolved. In other words, I feel like residents are not empowered they don't have a voice, really. And the problem with that is that government is not responsive. And so that's my point, is that a lot of the things that you're talking about, that's how the structure works. However, the biggest obstacles to preserving the island, as I see it, and I think we're in concert with that, is who are the people who are in office? What kind of people are they that we elect? And so it's critical that we get people in office that work in concert and truly represent residents.
Okay. Hey, so Nick, I want to address that. And I will say again that Maui Tomorrow is a 501c3 organization. We cannot endorse candidates. However, one of our public purposes is to save the INA, basically. And I think it's very consistent with that to help promote elections. And we have done that in the last 2 elections. We even created a video. Our motto around election time becomes, what happens on Maui depends on who votes. And so I think that we have been able to drive some people to the polls.
Absolutely.
We never tell them how to vote, and we leave that to other organizations because that's not our role. But we do play that important role. And you know, the other thing that's changing now, not just voting, but how you're going to testify if you're under home quarantine for 18 months. How's that going to work? It remains to be seen. but I think that that could be part of what we do, is provide a public service to people. And I'll bring up the Farm Security Hawaii again. Food Security Hawaii with the Ohana farms. And I think that's a great idea, and I see Maui Tomorrow as being supportive of that. Helping people to cope with the unprecedented changes in our lives.
No, and I understand that, and I agree with that. I think my point that I'm trying to make is that encouraging voters to participate, and this forum is one of those things, as it's a spectacular opportunity for people to understand, but mobilizing people to vote is what I'm talking about. Whether or not Maui Tomorrow endorses one particular candidate or another, this forum empowers people to understand the process and participate. And so that's what I'm trying to say, is that elections matter, and it's important that those who wish to create a new future understand that it is within their power to effect change and make all the things that we're talking about in this webinar even more effective, based upon having people that are receptive and responsive to the wishes of the electorate.
Okay, so I'm hearing that we should be putting even more emphasis on getting out the vote.
Yes.
And we will talk about that in our board meetings. We have 3 attendees. Oh, one of them is you. So I'm going to put your hand down.
There we go.
Lower hand. We have Mark Sheehan up next. Can you hear us, Mark?
I can't.
Oh, what's up?
So I don't know if you can see me, but this whole business of, we have to realize that one of the reasons why Maui looks the way it does is because we've had a development machine that works the corridors of power at the state and county level nonstop. And so the main difference with the new people that we have put on the council is that they are listening to us more. But you've got to understand that it never stops. And so we have to be much more organized and build our organizations to the point where we have real political power, because we're going up against the machine that has really, over the last 40 and 50 years, has made the Maui that we wanted to keep rural look more and more urban, and allowed it to look a lot more like Southern California and a refuge for wealthy people, rather than build the affordable housing that has been our priority. So we have to really not only elect people, we have to be able to, in an organized way, show up in their office and lobby for the things that are important to us.
All right, thank you, Mark. I see a question from, that's already been answered, from Cambria Moss. So Sara Sekulow, thank you for answering that. Who else do we have with a raised hand? Anyone? I think we're done.
We're good.
I'd like to say one thing. I don't know where this fits in, but there's a lot of people living here on Maui that are just local families trying to hang on. And the work that we're doing, while folks who've lived here all their lives certainly appreciate having a place to go fish and having a place to hang out, and having things that benefit them and their families, they also need jobs. And by just dismissing everything with the tourism industry, as much as we don't like it, we're dismissing a lot of jobs. I just don't think that we can afford to take a viewpoint like this. I think it hurts people, and I think it's not realistic. I think we need to look for the place where there can be jobs that have meaning and there's a transition to those jobs. If we have less tourism, there needs to be something to replace it. I know Maui Tomorrow is an organization that really tries to offer solutions. So I think each of us who leaves this seminar, this webinar, as we testify for what we like and don't like, need to look at those solutions. If we all put our collective minds together, there will be solutions. There always have been. Places that used to be dependent on tobacco now have very different, they now have health industries. So we don't know exactly what our future is going to be. There's a lot of good suggestions in the Maui Island Plan in the economic section of ways to diversify our economy, but that really has to be one of the things that becomes more than lip service in the years ahead, because otherwise you're just forcing a lot of people who love this place and who were born and raised here to go someplace else to look for work.
Well, thank you for bringing that up, Lucienne. I'm not sure if you've been there when I've testified to this effect, but I've told the council at least twice that Maui Tomorrow has never advocated for a reduction in tourism because of the pain that it would cost for the people who are in that industry. But we would like to see a cap. Of course, now what's happening is there's a forced reduction, and you know, we're not diversified, and so the damage, the carnage, really is probably going to be worse than in 2008 or 11, whenever that recession hit. But I personally am going to be trying to adopt someone, find someone who's in need, and do what I can to help them get by. I think the Ohana Farms idea is a great idea, and I know that people are working on that. Our farmers are also already suffering because of the restaurant closure. I'm wondering what Bobby Pahia is going to do, because I'm sure the old Lahaina Luau is closed down and that's his main customer. So we all have to pull together. I do want to express some apprehension, though, that people who are very pro-development will take advantage of the fact that the EIS law has been suspended, that the Sunshine Law has been suspended, and take advantage of the situation. So we need to engage even more now, even harder, even though it's got to be all online. So that's how I feel. Anybody else? I think I see some more questions. Boy, you guys have a lot of endurance. Excellent point. Thank you, Nick. Okay, well, I think those are just comments, people saying great job, and thank you very much for your patience with our first webinar. So we're gonna end the meeting.
Right.
And I thank you, thank all of our participants. Thank you for supporting us all. It's been a real pleasure, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Hui ho.
Okay,
Aloha.
hui ho.
Oh, thank you.
All right, aloha.